Let's explore autistic history and the Autism Wars. This is part 27 in a series. We are in the 90s and we are learning about autistic community and how it was developed through Autism Network International and an article written by autistic advocate Jim Sinclair that was published in 2005, and I've shared portions of this on previous videos, and in this one we're going to jump right back into where we left off. And we are in the section defining membership. Who are we? And picking back up right here where Sinclair says, we decided that our mission was to advocate for civil rights and self-determination for all autistic people, regardless of whether they were labeled high or low functioning, and regardless of whether they were able to participate independently in our language-based network. To that end, we understood we really had to make our newsletter available to parents and professionals, because educating parents and professionals was the only way we could hope to affect the lives of autistic people who weren't able to participate on their own. But we decided that the pen pal list was to be confidential for autistic people only. Once again, we set boundaries between our public activity and willingness to serve as a resource for non-autistic people and our private autistic connections. This next section is called Spreading the Word. Kathy immediately began mailing announcements about ANI to all the NT-run autism organizations she could find in the United States. Donna worked on spreading the word internationally during her book tours, and I, the only one of us who had internet access at that time, posted announcements online. I was a member of a new online autism mailing list, and for a while, I was the only autistic person in that forum. Most of the other members of the mailing list were parents of young autistic children, and a few were professionals who worked with autistic people. As usual for an autistic person trying to participate in an NT-oriented autism forum, most of my participation consisted of describing my personal experiences of autism and trying to answer parents' questions about whether my experiences might shed light on their children's behavior. It was an autism forum, but it was definitely not autistic space. I printed the first issue of Our Voice, the ANI newsletter, in November 1992. We had about 15 subscribers, most of whom were non-autistic parents of autistic children. It was hard to find other autistic people. In terms of numbers, the initial response was discouraging. Hostile responses from established NT-run autism organizations were also unexpected and upsetting. This next section is called Encountering Opposition. When I had first started seeking to communicate with other autistic people in the late 1980s, I had approached autism organizations and professionals who worked with autistic people in the naive belief that they and I and other verbal autistic people had some common purpose. My purposes in seeking to form a mutual aid self-help group for autistic people were to share firsthand experiences to counter the uniformly gloomy and pessimistic and often offensive and insulting portrayals of autism in the existing literature, and to advocate for improved support services for autistic people, to advocate for improved support services for autistic people. This is key. Sinclair says here, at the time I began my search, I had lost my job and was homeless, but I was unable to qualify for any assistance because I was considered too bright to be disabled. Yep. You see, already back then. Whew, okay. It seemed to me that these goals ought to be shared by people who were interested in learning about autism or in helping autistic people. That most of the responses ranged from total indifference to empty, encouraging words that were not backed up with any action. People would say it sounded like a good idea, but would not run announcements about the project in their newsletters or put other verbal autistic people in contact with me. The only two exceptions to this pattern were the Organization for Parents of More Able Autistic People, which occasionally printed letters from autistic people and maintained the pen pal directory through which I eventually contacted Kathy and Donna, and an autism professional who arranged for a scholarship for me to attend a conference. The first autism conference I ever attended, in fact, and set aside a room during one of the conference sessions for any autistic people who wanted to meet. No other newsletters were printing all letters. No other conferences were facilitating contact among autistic people, and no one else was offering any practical support whatsoever to autistic peer contact. A few professionals, though, did take advantage of my meetings with them to ask me personal questions about my experience of autism. Even worse, it seemed that when we did manage to find each other and work together to further our goals, responses from the autism establishment escalated from indifference to active subterfuge. So by the summer of 1991, several of us had made contact with each other via the Pen Pal directory, and the 1991 Autism Society of America National Conference was the first conference I attended where I met autistic people whom I already knew. Several of us made a point of asking questions or making comments during the question and answer portions of as many presentations as possible, always identifying ourselves as autistic people. The presenter seemed pleased with our contributions, and a great many audience members sought us out afterward to talk to us and ask questions. Our visible presence at the 1991 conference and the obvious interest many parents had in meeting us drew the attention of the ASA Board of Directors. Two of us were approached by a board member and some other parents and asked if we would like the board to help us form a committee that would be advisory to the board and would have some input into ASA and its future conferences. We accepted on the spot. We were told that our committee would be allowed to have a representative present at ASA board meetings. We would have some input into planning the 1992 National Conference and more. So we're going to talk about the and more in the next video coming up. And this is, we're in the early 90s here, 91 and 92 in Autism Network International History shared by Jim Sinclair. So we'll pick up in the next video. Thank you for learning more autistic history with me.